They told 42 members of my family that I was mentally unstable. Imagine that. 42 people, cousins, nephews, nieces, even my own daughter, whispering behind my back as if I had lost my mind. It started after my wife passed away 2 years ago. I had been quiet, yes. Lonely, yes. But unstable? No. I was grieving, that's all. My daughter, Emily, and her husband, Ryan, offered to take me on a vacation to Hawaii to cheer me up, they said. It sounded like a kind gesture, and I believed them. I packed my bags, feeling a spark of joy for the first time in months. The ocean breeze, the laughter of tourists, the warm sun, it all felt healing. But that peace didn't last long. On the third morning, Emily said she and Ryan were going out for a short walk. They took the rental car keys. I waited at the hotel lobby, sipping coffee, expecting them to return in an hour. But hours turned into a full day. My calls were unanswered. Their numbers were blocked. I was confused, then terrified. I asked the front desk if they had checked out. They had. And they had canceled my room too. My wallet was in the safe, which they must have taken when I was asleep. I was stranded on an island, thousands of miles away from home, with only the clothes I was wearing and $12 in my pocket. It took me 2 days to contact my bank and regain access to my account. That's when I saw it. Transfers, withdrawals, property sales, everything was gone. My daughter and her husband had drained my savings and sold my house while I was on vacation. They told everyone I'd been declared mentally unfit and that they were managing my finances for my own safety. The betrayal was worse than the theft. I returned home, broke but determined. For months, I lived in a rented room, quietly collecting evidence, paperwork, recordings, and statements. Then one day, my cousin called and told me there would be a big family meeting. Emily and Ryan were telling everyone they were worried about me again. I showed up. I listened. I said nothing. They painted a picture of a senile old man, confused, delusional, unstable. When they were done, I stood up. Calmly, I reached into my bag and pulled out one single document. A legal statement proving every sale and transaction they made was forged, along with the police report confirming an ongoing investigation. The room went silent. Emily's face turned pale. Ryan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Then I told them one thing. You took my money, but you lost something you'll never get back. My trust. That day, I walked out of that house for the last time. After that family meeting, silence hung in the air like a heavy curtain. No one dared to speak. My daughter Emily kept her head down, tears glistening in her eyes. But I didn't feel pity anymore. I felt peace. Cold, steady peace. For years, I had been their safety net, their financial backup, their emotional support. I paid for their wedding, their first house, even helped Ryan start his business. And this was how they repaid me, by painting me as insane so they could steal what I built. I walked out that night without saying goodbye to anyone. Outside, the air was cool, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The next morning, I met with Detective Harris, the officer handling my case. He had been skeptical at first, like everyone else, but once he saw the bank records, notarized signatures, and the falsified medical report Ryan had forged, his tone changed completely. "Sir," he said quietly, "we'll get him." Weeks turned into months, but the case grew stronger. Ryan had used a fake letter from a psychologist claiming I was mentally unstable and incapable of managing my affairs. That letter had been enough to convince the court to grant him power of attorney. When Harris tracked down the psychologist, she admitted she had never even met me. Ryan had paid someone to forge her signature. That was the nail in the coffin. By then, word had spread through the family. The same relatives who had called me crazy old George now called to apologize, to explain, to justify. I didn't answer any of them. I had no anger left, just disappointment. Emily and Ryan were arrested 6 months later. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to. The law would handle them. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. I rented a small beachfront cabin on the same island where they had abandoned me. Funny, isn't it? The place where I lost everything became the place where I found peace again. Every morning, I walked by the shore, collected shells, and wrote in my journal. People started talking to me. Tourists, locals, other retirees. Slowly, I began to feel human again. One day, a young man named Mark sat beside me on a bench. He was a traveler, just 23, but wise beyond his years. We talked about life, family, betrayal, forgiveness. He listened without judgment, and before he left, he said something I'll never forget. You don't owe them your hate, you owe yourself peace. That night I couldn't sleep. His words echoed in my head. I looked at the few things I still owned, an old watch, some clothes, a few keepsakes, and I realized how little I needed to be happy. The money, the property, the family drama, it was all noise. I decided then that if I ever got my money back, I wouldn't keep it. I'd use it for something better, something that mattered. When the settlement finally came through, the total amount shocked me. Between insurance payouts, seized assets, and damages, I had more than enough to start over comfortably. But I didn't want comfort. I wanted meaning. I sold everything, every account, every piece of property that had been returned to me, and I donated it all to organizations supporting abandoned seniors and victims of financial abuse. People called me crazy again, but this time I smiled. Because maybe they were right. Maybe in a world that values greed, compassion looks like madness. I felt lighter than ever before. Emily wrote me from prison once. She said she was sorry, that she didn't know how Ryan had manipulated her, that she missed me. I read the letter 3 times, folded it carefully, and placed it inside my journal. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I knew she needed to find her own peace just like I had to find mine. Months later, I was invited to speak at a community center about my experience. I hesitated at first, but then I realized my story might help someone else. So I stood before a small crowd of strangers and told them everything. How trust can be twisted, how love can be weaponized, and how healing begins when you stop chasing revenge. When I finished, the room went silent, just like that day at the family meeting. But this time, the silence wasn't filled with guilt or shock. It was filled with understanding. People came up to me afterward, hugging me, crying, thanking me. That was when I knew I'd done the right thing, that my pain had found purpose. Still, sometimes, late at night, I walk by the water and think about what could have been, if things had been different, if Emily had chosen love over greed. But then I remind myself, life doesn't break you to destroy you, it breaks you to rebuild you, stronger, wiser, and freer than ever before.
A year passed since that day I donated everything. I thought my story had ended, but life had another chapter waiting for me. I had become somewhat of a local legend on the island. People called me the old man who gave it all away. Some would stop by just to talk. Some brought me food. Others simply sat beside me quietly as the ocean waves crashed in front of us. I had peace, but sometimes peace can feel lonely. Then one morning, a letter arrived at the small post office near my cabin. It wasn't from Emily. It was from a woman named Clara. She said she was the director of a foundation that received part of my donation. She wanted to thank me personally. I hesitated at first. I didn't donate for recognition, but something about her words felt genuine, warm, humble, real. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe by the harbor. She was around my daughter's age, but her eyes carried a kind of calm wisdom that made me feel understood from the moment she smiled. "Mr. Walker," she said softly, "you may not realize it, but your donation helped us build shelters for over 200 abandoned seniors across the state. Some of them say your story gave them hope again." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. I wasn't used to hearing that my pain had helped someone. I had only wanted to end a cycle of cruelty, yet somehow my loss had turned into light for others. From that day on, Clara and I began working together. She invited me to visit one of the shelters. My heart trembled when I walked in. The residents were laughing, painting, sharing stories. One old man came up to me and said, "You're the reason I'm alive today." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged him and whispered, "No, my friend, you are the reason I kept going." Weeks turned into months, and the foundation grew stronger. Clara often sought my advice about how to expand the project. I helped her write grant proposals, organize events, and tell our story to the public. Every time I spoke on stage, people cried. They didn't cry for me. They cried for themselves, because everyone in that room had lost something at some point. Some had lost money, some had lost trust, some had lost family. But my message was always the same. Forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. One evening, after an event, Clara and I sat by the beach under a golden sunset. She asked quietly, "Do you ever regret giving everything away?" I smiled and said, "I didn't give it away. I set it free." She nodded, her eyes glistening in the fading light. Silence stretched between us, but it was the kind of silence that healed, not hurt. We started meeting more often, not for work, but for companionship. She told me about her own struggles, how her parents had abandoned her when she was young, how she built the foundation from nothing. I realized then that we were two broken souls who had learned how to turn pain into purpose. One night, she said, "You know, George, maybe the family you lose isn't really lost. Maybe life just makes space for the family you're meant to find." Her words struck deep into my heart. From that moment, Clara became like the daughter I always wanted, one who understood without judgment, who cared without asking for anything in return. We started visiting different cities, sharing our story, meeting people who had been betrayed, abandoned, forgotten. Everywhere we went, we saw tears, smiles, and hope being reborn. I never asked for fame, but people started recognizing us online, calling our journey the Silent Redemption. That name made sense because redemption doesn't come from shouting or revenge. It comes from silent acts of goodness that ripple through the world without anyone noticing. Sometimes late at night, I still think about Emily. I wonder if she's doing better, if prison changed her, if she ever forgave herself. But I've learned not to let that pain define me. I send a quiet prayer for her every time I look at the stars. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, she's looking at the same sky, thinking about her father the man she once abandoned on a beach, but who found peace there instead.
It was a quiet afternoon when the past came knocking again. I was sitting by the ocean with Clara, watching the waves roll in, when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and frowned. "George," she said slowly, "you need to see this." She handed me the phone. It was an email from the state rehabilitation program. They had received a letter from a recently released inmate, my daughter, Emily. She wanted to meet me. My heart stopped for a second. I thought I had buried that chapter of my life long ago, but there it was, opening itself like an old wound. Clara placed her hand on mine. "You don't have to do it if you're not ready." I took a deep breath and said, "No, I think it's time." The meeting was arranged at one of the senior centers our foundation had built. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I arrived, Emily was already there, sitting on a bench by the garden. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, but her eyes, the same eyes that once looked at me with love, were filled with guilt and fear. She stood up the moment she saw me, but I didn't move. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. Finally, she whispered, "Dad, I don't deserve your forgiveness." Her voice cracked, and tears streamed down her cheeks. I walked closer, slowly, carefully, as if approaching a memory that might break if I moved too fast. I said quietly, "You're right. You don't deserve it, but I'm giving it anyway." She broke down completely, falling into my arms, sobbing like the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. For the first time in years, I held her again, not as the daughter who betrayed me, but as the daughter who finally came home. She told me everything, how Ryan had manipulated her, how she'd believed I was losing my mind, how guilt had eaten her alive every single day in prison. She said she wanted to make things right somehow. I didn't know if redemption was truly possible, but I saw sincerity in her eyes. I told her she couldn't undo the past, but she could build a better future. "Start by helping others," I said. "That's how you'll heal." Clara, who had been watching from a distance, walked over and gently placed her hand on Emily's shoulder. "You can work with us," she said softly, "at the foundation." Emily's eyes widened. "You'd let me?" Clara smiled. "We believe in second chances." And just like that, my two worlds collided. The pain of my past and the peace of my present meeting in one fragile moment of forgiveness. The weeks that followed were strange, but healing. Emily began volunteering at the shelter, quietly, without seeking attention. She worked with the elderly, listened to their stories, helped them with meals, and sometimes even sang for them. I watched from afar, never interfering, just observing her transformation. She was different now, humble, kind, grateful. One evening, she came to me with a small wooden box. "Dad," she said, "I made this for you." Inside was a simple carving of a wave and a quote that read, "Forgiveness doesn't change the past, it changes the heart." I looked at her and felt tears well up for the first time in years. I said, "You've changed. Your mother would be proud." She smiled through her tears and whispered, "And you never stopped being my father." From that day forward, we began to rebuild our relationship one conversation at a time. No grand gestures, no dramatic apologies, just quiet understanding. Clara became like the bridge between us, patient, strong, and full of grace. Together, we started a new project under the foundation, a program called Second Tides, dedicated to helping families torn apart by betrayal and loss. It became our shared mission, our new beginning. People from across the country began writing to us,
sharing their own stories of broken families and second chances. The media wanted interviews, but I declined. I didn't need publicity. I had peace. Still, sometimes late at night, I would sit outside my cabin, listening to the ocean's endless rhythm, and think about how life had come full circle. I had been abandoned on a beach once, and now that same beach had become the place where my family was reborn. But I knew this wasn't the end. There was still something more waiting ahead, something unfinished, something calling me quietly beyond the horizon.
Months passed, and life began to feel peaceful again. The foundation grew. Our Second Tides program touched hundreds of families across the country, and for the first time in decades, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Emily had changed completely. She smiled more, helped others selflessly, and often stayed late at the shelter to comfort seniors who had no one left. Clara was proud of her too. We had become something like a family, not by blood but by choice. One evening, Clara approached me with an idea. "George," she said, "we've been invited to speak at a national conference in New York. It's a huge opportunity to share your story, maybe even get funding to open more centers." I hesitated. I hadn't left the island since everything happened. New York meant facing the world again, facing memories, facing judgment. But Clara's eyes were full of hope, and Emily's excitement was contagious. So I agreed. We boarded the plane together, me, Clara, and Emily. And for the first time since my wife's death, I wasn't afraid of the future. When we landed, the city lights stretched endlessly across the horizon. It was overwhelming, but beautiful. The conference hall was packed, hundreds of people waiting to hear our story. As I stepped onto the stage, I looked out at the faces in the crowd. Some were smiling, some crying, some holding notebooks ready to capture every word. I began speaking, slowly, carefully, from the heart. I told them about betrayal, forgiveness, and the quiet power of compassion. I told them how losing everything can sometimes show you what truly matters. And when I spoke of Emily, how she had once betrayed me, but now stood beside me helping others, the entire room fell silent. Then came a standing ovation. Not for me, but for the idea that love could survive even the worst kind of pain. Afterwards, dozens of people came up to us. One woman said, "Your story saved my marriage." Another whispered, "I made you call my father again after 10 years." I looked at Emily and Clara and felt something shift inside me. I realized this mission was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone who had ever been hurt and still chose to love again. That night in the hotel room, Clara looked at me with that calm smile of hers and said, "George, maybe your story isn't about loss at all. Maybe it's about finding your way home." Her words stayed with me for days. But home, where was that now? The island? The foundation? These two women beside me? I didn't know. The next morning, Emily knocked on my door. She was holding 2 cups of coffee and a letter. "Dad, this came for you." The envelope had no return address, just my name written in neat, delicate handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. "Mr. Walker, your story changed my life. I'm the doctor whose name was forged years ago. I live with guilt for not noticing sooner. Please let me make it right. I'd like to help your foundation." I sat there stunned, reading it again and again. The same psychologist Ryan had impersonated, the one whose fake letter started all of this, had reached out years later, searching for forgiveness. My past kept finding me, but each time it did, it brought healing instead of pain. I decided we'd meet her when we returned to the island. I wanted to tell her that I forgave her too, that none of us could live forever under the weight of regret. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something profound. Every wound I had carried had slowly turned into a doorway. Every person who had hurt me had somehow guided me toward a better version of myself. And maybe, just maybe, the universe had been teaching me all along that peace isn't found by escaping your story. It's found by rewriting it with grace. As the morning sun rose over the New York skyline, I felt something stir in my chest, a quiet certainty that another turning point was near. I didn't know what it was yet, but I could feel it, like the ocean before a storm, silent, but alive, waiting to change everything once more.
A few weeks later, we returned to the island, the same place where my story had once shattered and started again. The air felt softer, the ocean calmer, as if even nature was holding its breath for what came next. The day had finally come to meet the doctor. Her name was Dr. Martha Lee. She had flown all the way from California to see me. When she arrived at the foundation office, she looked nervous, clutching a small folder in her hands. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes held kindness and sorrow in equal measure. "Mr. Walker," she began, her voice trembling, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just need to say I'm sorry. I should have noticed the forgery. I should have spoken up when things didn't look right." I looked at her for a long moment, then smiled gently. "Dr. Lee," I said, "if I spent my life collecting apologies, I'd never have time to live." She blinked in surprise, and then tears filled her eyes. "You're forgiving me?" she whispered. "I already did," I said. "The day I forgave my daughter, I forgave everyone connected to that pain. Even you." She handed me the folder. "Then please take this," she said. "It's a proposal. I want to help build a rehabilitation program for caregivers and families who've lost trust, so others don't go through what you did." Her words hit me deeply. Clara, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward and said, "That's exactly what we need, to teach families how to heal before it's too late." Emily smiled softly, her hands clasped together. I felt something warm bloom in my chest, an emotion I hadn't felt in years. Hope, renewed and alive. We decided to partner with Dr. Lee and expand the foundation across several states. We called the new program Bridges of Grace. It wasn't just about money or therapy sessions. It was about rebuilding human connection, teaching people how to forgive without forgetting, how to love without losing themselves. Every week we traveled to different towns, sharing stories, hosting workshops, and meeting people who had been broken by the ones they trusted most. I saw the same pain in their eyes that I once carried, but now I could show them the path I had walked, the path back to peace. One evening after a long event in Los Angeles, we were sitting by the pier watching the sunset when Emily turned to me and said, "Dad, you know what's crazy? The more I help people, the lighter my own heart feels." I smiled and replied, "That's the secret of forgiveness. You think you're freeing others, but you're really freeing yourself." She rested her head on my shoulder, and for a moment, time stopped. It was everything I had ever wanted, not wealth, not recognition, just this quiet connection, a family healed by grace. Soon after, we received an invitation from a major television network. They wanted to make a documentary about our journey. Clara was thrilled, Emily was hesitant, and I was somewhere in between. But deep down, I knew this was bigger than us now. Our story could give hope to thousands who still felt trapped in bitterness and guilt. I agreed, but with one condition. The film had to focus on the message, not on me. They accepted. The filming began the next month,
and as cameras followed us through shelters, meetings, and homes, I saw how much light had come from what was once darkness. Dr. Lee became one of our closest allies, using her medical knowledge to help rebuild trust between families and caregivers. She often said, "George, your pain became my purpose." And I'd answer, "No, doctor, our pain became everyone's hope." One night during filming, the producer asked me a question I couldn't immediately answer. He said, "Mr. Walker, after everything you've been through, do you believe in happy endings?" I looked out at the sea, its waves glimmering under the moonlight, and said, "No, I don't believe in happy endings. I believe in honest ones." He smiled softly and turned off the camera. But deep down, I knew something was still unfinished. Something inside me was stirring again, as if life wasn't quite done teaching me yet. The next morning, as I opened my cabin door, a white envelope lay on the ground. It wasn't from anyone I knew. There was only a single line written on it. "You may have forgiven me, but I can't forgive myself. Please meet me where it all began." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I knew exactly who it was. My heart began to race. The ocean whispered outside like it knew too. This wasn't over. Not yet.
The letter wouldn't leave my mind all night. I read it again and again, the same line echoing like a heartbeat in my head. "Please meet me where it all began." I didn't need to guess where that was. It was the old beach in Hawaii, the place where Emily and Ryan had left me years ago. That was where my life had shattered, where pain had been born, but also where healing had started. I packed a small bag, leaving a note for Clara and Emily. "Don't worry, I need to face something from the past. I'll be back." The next morning, I boarded the earliest flight. The sky was heavy with gray clouds, like it knew what was waiting for me. When I arrived at the island, everything looked both familiar and different. The same ocean, the same sound of waves crashing, but now the air carried peace instead of fear. I walked down the narrow path toward the beach, and there she was, standing by the shoreline, her hair blowing in the wind. It was Ryan's sister, Lydia. She had disappeared after the trial, never contacting anyone. I hadn't seen her in years. She looked older, exhausted, her eyes filled with regret. When she saw me, her lips trembled. "Mr. Walker," she whispered, "thank you for coming." I nodded slowly. "I almost didn't," I said, "but I figured if someone asked me to meet here, it must mean they need peace as much as I once did." She looked down, her hands shaking. "Ryan's gone," she said quietly. "He passed away last month. He couldn't live with what he did. He wanted me to give you this." She handed me a small envelope. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Me, Emily, and Ryan on the day of their wedding, all of us smiling, full of hope. On the back, in Ryan's handwriting, were the words, "I am sorry. I never knew how to be the man you trusted me to be." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The wind carried the scent of the ocean, the same one that I had once cursed when I was abandoned here. Now it felt like it was forgiving us all. I folded the photo gently and said, "He was wrong. He just forgot how to love himself first." Lydia began to cry softly. "He wanted to apologize before he died. He asked me to make sure you knew he wasn't angry when he went. He said you were the father he never had." I stood there in silence, feeling the tears I hadn't realized were falling down my face. The years of pain, the betrayal, the forgiveness, it all came crashing together like the tide returning home. I placed a hand on Lydia's shoulder. "Tell him he's forgiven," I said quietly, "wherever he is." She nodded, then handed me another small box. "He wanted you to have this too." Inside was Ryan's watch, the one I had gifted him years ago when he married Emily. I closed my eyes for a moment and then smiled faintly. Life has a strange way of returning what we thought we lost, I murmured. Lydia said she wanted to help with the foundation, that she wanted to dedicate her time to helping people who were trying to rebuild their lives after mistakes. I agreed. It felt right. As the sun began to set, we stood there in silence, two people connected by pain but freed by forgiveness. The horizon burned gold and red, like the sky itself was writing the last apology on the edge of the world. That night I stayed by the beach alone, listening to the waves and the whisper of the wind. Everything felt full circle again, but I knew this wasn't the end. Something deeper was still calling me, something I couldn't name yet. As I watched the stars rise one by one, I heard my wife's voice in my mind, soft and warm, like a memory. "George, you've done enough forgiving. Now it's time to live." And for the first time in decades, I believed her. But the next morning, as I was preparing to leave the island, my phone buzzed. It was Clara. She sounded breathless, shaken. "George, you need to come back. It's Emily. She's in the hospital." The world went silent around me. My heart stopped. I dropped my bag and ran toward the road, searching for the first taxi I could find. The ocean roared behind me, as if it trying to tell me this wasn't the end of my story, only the next beginning.
The taxi raced through the coastal roads as the sky bled into morning light. My hands were trembling as I clutched the phone, trying to steady my breath. Clara's voice still echoed in my mind. "It's Emily. She collapsed last night." Every second felt like an eternity. I stared out the window, the sea following us like a shadow, each wave crashing as if reminding me of every choice, every moment that had brought me here. When I reached the hospital, Clara was waiting outside. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a faint smile when she saw me. "She's stable now," she said softly, "but the doctors aren't sure how long it'll take for her to recover. She overworked herself at the shelter. She never told anyone she'd been skipping her medication." I felt my knees weaken. "I should have noticed," I whispered. Clara shook her head. "You can't blame yourself. She was trying to prove she'd changed." We walked down the cold hallway together. The sound of heart monitors and hushed voices filled the air. When I stepped into Emily's room, my breath caught in my throat. She looked fragile, her skin pale, her chest rising and falling gently under the weight of the oxygen mask. I pulled a chair beside her bed and took her hand. It was warm, but weak. She opened her eyes slowly, and when she saw me, tears welled up behind the mask. "Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I smiled through the ache in my chest. "I'm here, Em. Always have been." She squeezed my fingers lightly. "I didn't want you to worry. I just wanted to do enough good to make you proud." I leaned closer and said, "You already did, from the moment you came back." She tried to smile, but her eyes filled with tears. "I was so afraid you'd never forgive me." I shook my head. "Forgiveness isn't something I gave you once. It's something I choose every day." For a while, we just sat there in silence, her hand in mine, the world shrinking to the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat. Clara joined us later, carrying coffee for me and a soft smile for Emily. "The doctors say she needs rest," Clara said gently. "No more skipping meals or pushing too hard." Emily nodded weakly, her voice soft. "I'll listen this time." Days turned into weeks. I stayed by her side every day, reading her favorite books, telling her stories from the beach, sometimes just sitting quietly. When she finally began to recover, the entire foundation threw a small gathering to celebrate. She stood on stage, a little shaky, but glowing with gratitude. "I hurt my father once, and I thought I'd lost him forever. But instead, he taught me that love doesn't vanish. It waits for you to come home." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. I watched her from the front row, my heart swelling with pride and something deeper, peace, real and whole. At that moment, I realized something profound. Life isn't about never falling apart. It's about what you build when you put yourself back together. After the event, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, Clara joined me by the window, overlooking the ocean. She said quietly, "George, do you ever wonder if this was how it was all meant to be?" I nodded slowly. If it took losing everything to learn how to live again, then yes. I think this was always the plan. We stood there for a while in silence, watching the moonlight shimmer on the water. Then Clara took my hand. "You've spent years forgiving everyone else. Maybe now it's time you forgive yourself." I looked at her, feeling tears sting my eyes, then finally nodded. "Maybe it is." That night, we walked to the beach near the shelter, Emily joining us halfway through. The three of us sat on the sand, watching the waves roll in, just like they did the day everything began. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Mom would have loved this." I smiled softly. "She never really left, Em. She's in every act of kindness we do." The ocean breeze wrapped around us like an old friend, and for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. The next morning, the sun rose brighter than I'd seen in years. I walked along the shore alone, holding Ryan's old watch in my palm. The tide was high, the waves alive and strong. I knelt down and placed the watch on the sand, letting the water take it away. "Goodbye, son. You're free now, and so am I." Behind me, I heard laughter, Clara and Emily calling me for breakfast. The sound was warm, alive, full of everything I once thought I'd lost. I turned around and smiled because I finally understood. This wasn't the ending of my story, it was the continuation of every moment I ever chose love over bitterness. As we walked back together, the island felt brighter, the world lighter, and my heart completely at peace. The man who had once been abandoned on a beach was no longer broken. He was home, and this time he wasn't alone.